D DRL by Dr. Kalpana Kanel. Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so even though the topic is called introduction, we actually have been talking about DRLs for the last day and a half. But I'll actually talk to you about the two papers we have published through the ACR Dose Index Registry. So I'm going to talk again. It's really good to repeat a little bit because you may have forgotten what we said yesterday, the concept of DRLs and achievable dose, a little bit about the dose index registry. And then I want to focus for most of my talk on the adult DRLs and pediatric DRLs that we have established in the United States. And Sam will be talking more about how to use it in clinical practice, but I just have one slide about how you could potentially use it in clinical practice. So again, to remind everyone, diagnostic reference levels, they were first proposed in 1990 by the ICRP, International Council on Radiation Protection, and they're typically set at the 75th percentile of a dose distribution from a survey conducted across a wide user base. So, you know, ACR, for example, is getting data from a wide user base, right? Academic, community, rural, and you're using a lot of data to establish the 75th percentile. One thing to keep in mind, they are investigational levels. They are not regulations. They are not legal standards of care. They do not apply to an individual patient. You're looking at a population-based dose and then determining what the DRLs are. They identify exams where levels of patient dose are unusually high, so anything over the 75th percentiles. And if that is consistently exceeded, you must conduct review of procedures and equipment for optimization. If not optimized, you want to take action to reduce your dose. Now, even though it says high, I would also say look at the doses that are too low. That's why I questioned Sam's data when he gave the talk. It's like he was half what the national was. But that is pretty typical of pediatric facilities, that they are very, very conscious of dose. And even though they are very, very low compared to national, they still will continue to do that. I have the same issue at my children's hospital. So there's always room for children's hospital, the doses to go up a little bit. But in general, their practices always go lower than national averages for dose. But the overriding clinical objectives of DRL is achieve acceptable image quality or adequate diagnostic information consistent with the medical imaging task. So as Napapong said earlier, they reduced the doses all across and then you could not see, get the image quality you want. So it has to be consistent. You cannot look at dose as a silo. You have to look at the corresponding image quality to be able to determine if your DRL is set correctly. So we follow, everyone, I think even yesterday it was mentioned, annals of the ICRP, ICRP publication 135, which is a fantastic publication on diagnostic reference levels. And it's available, I think it's openly available on the AAPM website. It's available to all members for free. I don't know in Thailand if it's available. Okay, it's available for free as well. Really great resource to read about diagnostic reference levels. On the other hand, what's achievable dose? So DRLs is like, 75th percentile. That's a threshold of investigation. But that does not mean your dose has to be at DRL. It really should be more around the achievable dose. So even if your threshold is set at 75th, most exams can be accomplished with achievable dose, which is around the 50th percentile or the median dose. And it can be used in DRLs to assist in optimizing image quality and dose. And as I mentioned, they're set at 50th percentile, meaning half of the facilities are producing images at lower doses and half are using higher doses. And you can find more information about achievable dose in NCRP 172. So the bottom line is that you as a facility are trying to be somewhere in this range, achievable dose at the 50th percentile or somewhere between 50th and 75th percentile. If you exceed 75th percentile, you should have a very good reason why, or you should investigate and reduce your dose. If you're too low, also, I feel you should investigate your dose and make sure you have adequate image quality. So really, you want to look at both of these numbers, not just 75th percentile, but you want to look at achievable dose as well to optimize your dose. Again, just to remind you, ACR, National Radiology Data Registry, and we are talking about using the dose index registry data to talk about DRLs. I will skip some of these slides. You've probably seen it a couple of times. Again, reminding people the process of getting the data collection and some of the reports. What's interesting here, again, the red is your facility median compared with the rest of the country. So it's really good to have that snapshot. All right, so now let's get to the main goal of this talk. So in my last talk, I said that the ACR as of August 2022 have collected 154 million exams. So when ACR started DIR in 2011, in 2017, we published, based on many, many exams, the diagnostic reference levels and achievable doses for 10 adult CT exams in the United States, okay, so in USA. So I'm going to talk pretty much about that. I was very fortunate to lead the work on this and publish this paper, but I have to give credit to my co-authors. I could not do it by myself, especially Priscilla Butler, who was really very important in getting this paper published. So what are the methods? So what we did is, so we talked about DIR, all facilities sending data, right, to DIR. Now, 5 years, 6 years later, 2016 is the data we looked at. So it had been about 5 years that the DR had been, in practice. So we decided we look at the 10 most commonly performed adult CT head, neck, and body exams, and we looked at 583 facilities in the United States. Okay, the data from those were analyzed. So remember, we could not just use every possible thing that was in DR. You had to curate the data. You had to make sure the data was clean. There was no skewing issues, mapping issues. So we looked at 583 facilities. For head, we use lateral thickness as an indicator of patient size. Now, we know from data that Sam showed earlier, over 6 years of age, the child is treated, head is treated like an adult head because it doesn't change much in size. So you might have protocols in your hospital, 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 6, and then beyond that, it's like an adult protocol. For neck and body exams, we use water equivalent diameter. Now, you could also use effective diameter. I think the difference is not that significant. If you use one or the other, I think your data would only vary maybe by 5 or 10%. So for the adult paper, we use water equivalent diameter. For the pediatric paper, we actually use effective diameter. Don't ask me why, but that's the way it worked out. We just did it 2 different ways. So for the adult paper, we used 1.3 million examinations to provide achievable dose, mean 25th, 75th percentile for CTDI wall, DLP, and SSDE. So just the fact that we use 1.3 million exams, that gives you so much confidence that the data is so robust, right? The statistics is so robust that the numbers that the DIR came out with are very good data because the number of exams we took into account. If you remember, I mentioned earlier that DRLs do not apply. You do not calculate DRLs based on individual dose. It's always with a vast number of doses across the population. So I think this was a very good, solid statistical number that we used for the paper. The results were compared with DRLs from 8 other countries. And if we do it again, I'm sure Thailand will be one of those countries in the near future, right? Let's hope for that. And then all statistical analysis were performed using a SAS software. And all of this was done by the dose index registry staff, even though we are the ones who looked at the data and we chopped it and everything, but just giving us that 1.3 million exam and giving us averages, they had to do it because it's so much data. There's no way I could have looked at 1.3 million exams. It was done in an automated fashion by the DIR and then sent to us. And then myself and my co-authors, we sat and analyzed the data. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of tables from that paper. So 1.3 million exams, and you can see that the most common exam in the United States is the abdomen pelvis. And under the abdomen pelvis, we had abdomen pelvis without contrast, with contrast, and then we had an abdomen pelvis kidney without contrast. And that made up about 44.8% or 45% of this 1.3 million exams. The next highest was chest. Now remember, this is adult, and that made up about 25.2%. And then we had the brain, about 17%, and then so on and so forth. So the most common study in the United States, irrespective of where you are in the country, is abdomen pelvis. That's the most common exam. And that makes up, if you can even optimize your abdomen pelvis protocol, you have taken care of 50 to 60% of your exams already. So very nice to see that the patterns were same across the country. So here are some slides. I'll just show you a few results, but what we did in the paper, this is for head without contrast, CTDI wall, DLP. It shows you the dose as a function of lateral thickness. Now remember, it doesn't vary a lot for adults, but you can see here we went by 12 to 14, 14 to 16, 16 to 18, 18 to 20, and then this is just looking at the average of all of them. The blue bar here is the 50th percentile, and the red bar here is the 75th percentile. So your doses want to be, somewhere between this at your facility. So we plotted CTDI and the DLP. So now, for example, a hospital here in Thailand, you want to see how you're doing with your head brain. And I know Sam had those numbers. I don't have it in my slideshow, but you could, and if you have the lateral thickness, you could go and compare it to the DIR and see how your data is doing. Agreed, it's a different population, but still something to compare to and see the practice in other countries. Here is chest. Now, when we did the adult paper, at that time, the size-specific dose estimate was only available for body. So here now, when we come down to chest, we have the CTDI achievable dose, the CTDI DRL. The green is the size-specific dose estimate achievable dose, and the purple is the size-specific dose estimate DRL. And it makes total sense, right, that number, those are slightly higher than the CTDI. Not always, but in a lot of cases, it's slightly higher depending on the patient size. And here we use the thickness of the patient. So photoequivalent diameter, somebody asked this question earlier. We didn't do it by weight, we did it by thickness. So the lateral dimension or the water equivalent diameter, which you can calculate from the localizer image or the scout image, and all done automatically in the dose index registry. And so we did this we did it by these bins, 4 centimeter bins to give you, and very nicely you can see if I draw a line here, that the dose is increasing as the patient size is increasing, which is what we want. As the patient size decreases, the dose decreases, right? That means your protocols looked optimized that it's working, that you're reducing using automatic tube current modulation, or if you're using manual techniques, it's working. And then similarly for DLP, for the most part, the data looked really good. And then this all is just an average of everything. And then over here, again, you can see all the way from chest, abdomen, and then chest, abdomen, pelvis. Similarly, CTDI wall, SSDE, and DLP. You get the idea. We have tons of these graphs in the paper so that you can compare your doses to what's in the paper. So in conclusion, for the adult, our DRL for an adult head was around 56, 57 milligray. The achievable dose is 49. So an adult head, you should be somewhere between 49 and 57 if you're comparing to the American population. For us, as I mentioned earlier, for the Siemens scanners, we are around 45. But for GE, we are actually around 60, which is slightly higher than the DRL, but that's okay. And then you have data for the neck and the C-spine as well. Now, we wanted to make sure that what we calculated out of the dose index registry, how did it compare to other countries? So what this shows you, if I look at the head, here is this paper, and our data was based on 2016. It's actually 56, the DRL, not 57 as in previous slide. AAPM ACR had some data which was published in 2013 that was 75, NCRP 75, Japan 85, EU 60, UK 60, Ireland 58, very close to ACR, Australia 60, Canada 79, and Greece 67. And I hope in the next iteration we'll see Thailand as a column over here, right? So, but the idea was, let's compare and see whether we are in the ballpark. And as you can see, we are kind of in the ballpark, right? Most people were 60, but there are some high ones, 85. And that's from 2015. That seems like a little high dose to me, but that's what they had. And then similarly, another example, let's look at abdomen pelvis because that's the most common exam in the United States. The DRL was 16 for this work. And then you can look at the other countries. It ranges anywhere between 12 all the way to 25 milligray. Again, in the ballpark, even though there is plus or minus. The encouraging thing about comparing is that I'm not at 16 and everyone else is not at 160. They're in the same magnitude, which is what matters. It doesn't matter at 16. As long as it's in the same magnitude, that means we're all doing pretty well comparing to each other. So we definitely had to compare to other countries to see where we are. And I think we were very happy that our data agreed with what some of the other countries were seeing. And then you can see sporadic, some other information that we found in the literature for some of the other exams. One thing to keep in mind when you're doing this comparison is it an apples to apples comparison? You know, the way I calculated, my DIR calculated the DRL, we are going by what's in the literature, what they're reporting, but we are not involved in their work and how they came up with those numbers. So that's a little bit you have to think about. Are you comparing apples to apples? Again, what their DRLs might be for a 50 kilogram patient, while in the United States, the average is about 70 kilograms. So again, something to keep in mind. So this was adult based only on size, okay? What about pediatric DRLs? So this we published, adult we published 2017. And then everyone started asking, what are you doing about pediatric? Sam being one of them. What are you doing about pediatric, right? So we started working on analyzing DIR data from 10 most commonly performed pediatric examinations in the US. And here, for the adult paper, we only use 1 year of data because we had enough adult examination. But because peds, as you saw even in Sam's data, his own institutional data, he had a lot fewer exams for pediatric compared, to what the DIR has. And just because we all scan fewer children, which is a good thing compared to adults, we decided to do 5 years of data to actually get good statistics. So we looked at data from 2016 all the way to 2020. So that was 5 years data on patients younger than 18 years of age. Same thing, but this time we did not only by size, but we did by age. Because in the US, most pediatric hospitals scan their protocols are based on age. Some base it on size, but most of them base it on age. So we thought it would be important to give the data of DRLs in both ways, age as well as size. And same thing, we did the achievable dose and DRLs were calculated. Head exams were grouped only by age, unlike the adult. The reason was when we started looking at the data for the children, the head in the algorithms, shoulders were in the way because they're children. So the analysis was not working out very well in terms of function of size. So for head, for pediatric patients, we only did calculation as a function of age and not by size because it was causing too much uncertainty in our data because of shoulders being in the way. And we did not calculate size-specific dose estimate because when we were analyzing this work, half the data did not have SSDE because SSDE for heads did not get published till I think 2018, somewhere there. So we just decided not to include that for the heads. And then body exams were grouped by age and size. And now I mentioned earlier that the adult was water equivalent diameter. For the peds, we use effective diameter. And again, all analysis was done using SAS software. And this is the paper. It's online in radiology, published last year in 2021. And all the co-authors are over here. And I'm going to show you some of the data from the pediatric data now. So for the adult, we use about 1.3 million exams. For the pediatric, we did about 1.5 million exams over 5 years. So imagine for adult, it was 1.3 million based on 1 year. If we had 5 years, that would be a lot more data. For pediatric, we had to go 5 years to get enough N. So that's what this was showing. And just like an adult, we had abdomen pelvis. That was the most common exam. For the child, it was more the head exam. That was the most common exam. So here you can see about 876,000 exams out of 1.5 were head. which makes sense, right? Children, normally you take them to the ER because they fall or, something else. It's typically head exam that we do on kids, followed by about 438,000 for abdomen and pelvis. So it's opposite than the adult, which makes total sense, at least in the United States. And then we also wanted to look at it as a function of different type of facilities. As mentioned before, the DIR has different types of facilities. And what's interesting is most of our children, and I'm sure that's the case even in Thailand, are being scanned at community hospitals, not so much at academic hospitals, and at children's hospitals, right? Because most people will take their kids to children's hospital. It's dedicated. So you can see here 407,000 exams at Children's Hospital, but a lot of the others were at Community Hospital, 874,000. And you can see academic, other multidisciplinary clinics, freestanding, not that much. What does that mean? That is really significant. That means community hospitals and children's hospitals, where most of the scanning is happening, are places also maybe that don't have physicists. Because physicists in the United States are mainly at academic centers. Community hospitals and rural places are serviced by consulting physicists, but they are not there necessarily to optimize protocols. So it's very interesting that if you're doing most of your imaging at community hospitals, that your protocols should be optimized, hopefully, to give you good care for kids. From the data I showed you earlier, though, it looks like everyone is child sizing their protocols because we saw an increase in dose with increase in size. But most of the kids that were scanned in this exam were 15 to 18-year-olds, which are pretty much like adults, right? 15 to 18-year-olds. 0 to less than 1 is about 173,000, and then compared to the larger kids, much more, which is a good thing. Again, we don't want to scan the little babies because they're much more sensitive to radiation. You only want to scan them if there is a clinical need. And that's what the trend is showing across the country, that we scan more adult. And these kids like 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 15-year-olds, they're playing sports and they get, they fall and they hurt themselves. So there's more fracture imaging and stuff like that. So you can see a lot more exams on the older kids. And then what's another thing that was interesting, most of the data we got was from centers who do only about less than 10 CTs exams in a month, compared to someone like my facility that does greater than 100 in a month, right? So a lot of the data is coming from facilities that are not using CT as much compared to academic sites that do a lot more CT. So it's really good trends to observe where the data is coming from. So here is the data. This is the achievable dose and the diagnostic reference levels, CTDI-wall, SSD, and DLP for our head exams. And so let's look at head without contrast. This is a function of age, 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 6. And as I told you, that pediatric heads beyond age 6 are pretty much scanned with an adult protocol because their head size does not change. And what's good to see is that the dose the dose is increasing with age, which is the way it should be. That means we are child sizing our protocols as we are scanning babies. So you're going from 19 milligray to 46 milligray as you're increasing the age. Same for the DRLs. It's going from 23 to 55. And just for comparison, the adult was between 49 and 57. So the good news is that we are doing good for our children, right? Our dose is much lower than for the adult. And then similarly, the neck data shown over here, that the dose does drop for the babies and goes up for the adults, and then it compares to the adult. And this was very heartening for us because we did the analysis for both adult and peds, and it would have been a real problem had we seen an opposite trend where we were overdosing our children. So this was really good to see. Similarly, for abdomen, here is as a function of age, the dose, it's not obviously as high as for in head, but it is going up as the age is going up, which is good to see. Again, both for abdomen and pelvis, and here's just abdomen and pelvis as well. And here is a comparison to the adult data. So in all cases, our doses for peds were lower than the adult DRLs, which was fantastic news. That means across the United States, people were paying attention to pediatric protocols and optimizing them based on age. So I also said that we did dose analysis for our children as a function of age and size. So here is size, and this is in centimeters. So we decided to do in 4 centimeter bins. So you're going from smaller sized kids to larger sized kids. And it is not uncommon in the US to have a 5-year-old that can be obese, big child needs as much dose as an adult. And here is dose increasing as the size is increasing. Again, the trend that we want to see with increasing size of children. So this type of data is there in the paper for all anatomy, all the 10 exams that we looked at for children. And just like the adult paper, we compared to whatever was available in the literature for children. This is a little busy slide, but I'll just go through. We're comparing the DIR data to Australia, Belgium, Canada, Germany, Japan, Korea, and Europe. And the problem with children comparison was that everyone was doing different age bins. So, DIR did 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 6, 6 to 18. But you can see here Australia was doing 0 to 4. Canada is doing 0 to 3. Europe was doing anything less than 3 months. So it was really hard to do an apples to apples comparison. But at least you can see in the ballpark, our DRL was 23. Theirs was 30, 22, kind of on the same magnitude. So at least, again, a little reassuring that we were similar to other countries in the world with our data, and similarly for DLP. So again, I will reiterate, you have all this data. What do you do with it? You want to compare your data with the DRL data, analyze. Again, you have to have a team, as Sam mentioned earlier, make sure that your data makes sense comparing wise. And doesn't mean just if you're higher than these published in the literature that something's wrong. That's why you have to deep dive and figure out, is something really wrong with my data, or is it okay to be over the DRLs? And you have to go through that cyclic process every few years to make sure your doses are optimized. And you work with radiologists, you work with technologists and the physicists to do your optimization. So one way, and Sam's going to talk a lot more about this, but I want to at least show one slide showing how would you use this data. So when the data was published, I went and looked at my facility, and these are just made up numbers. This is not really data from my facility, but I looked at what the DIR had, and then I looked at, you can look at your facility, and this is for children, ahead for the different age groups. And you compare your data, and you can see that it's okay for the little ones, but 2 to 6-year-old is a little higher, and 6 to 18 is a lot higher than what's in the DIR data. So and similarly for chest, similarly for abdomen, pelvis. So if you even start here, where you do a comparison and say, okay, these are the 5 exams I need to start looking at because my dose is much higher than what the DIR has established, that's where you start and start working on these 5 protocols to optimize your dose. So that's what I advise facilities. And say you don't have a dose monitoring program, that's fine. Then what you do is take about 30 to 50 exams of head, monitor your 30 to 50 patients, look at the dose, calculate the median and the 50th and 75th percentile, and compare it with the DIR. So just because you don't have an automated way of doing it doesn't mean you can't do it manually. It's more tedious, but you can start with about 30 to 50 exams. You can't do it on one exam and kind of get an idea what your doses are and do your comparison. And again, Sam will talk a lot more about how you use DRLs, published DRLs in your clinic. You can also draw these box and whisker plots that I showed you that the DIR. This is from my facility, and you can see that we have a whole range. So these are probably our average size patient, but these are probably a little larger patients. And so we have a whole range of doses. So you have to be careful what you're looking at to see, are you comparing apples to apples? The shaded area in this Tableau graph is the DRLs based on the paper. And our protocols are small, medium, large, and then this is a different protocol. Chest, abdomen, pelvis with contrast. This is also medium, large, small. I don't remember what the difference was. Maybe it's from a different scanner. But you can do things like that and play with your data to however way you want to analyze your data and compare to published literature. The key is that you're doing something to compare your dose to national averages and making sure that your doses are optimized, because just knowing your dose is not important. It's important to also know what others are doing to make sure you're doing yours correctly. So what are the limitations of the DIR, right? Both these papers were very well received, landmark papers in the US because we don't have anything like that published. It does use automated data collection, but the one key factor I want to talk about here is only the dose we looked at. We did not look at the corresponding image quality, right? Because DIR does not collect images. So we are expecting that all the sites submitting data to the DIR are sending their optimized data. So that's one limitation of the DIR. There's no images we are looking at. We are just saying, okay, whatever you send is optimized for your facility. So no clinical images or no clinical indication, which I'll talk about later today. I already talked about mapping. We are relying on the facility to do a good job with mapping. Use of dose reduction techniques was not collected. So in this data that I presented for both adult and peds, I cannot tell you which sites were using iterative reconstruction, which were not. I can't tell you which sites had a 256 slice scanner versus a 4 slice scanner because we didn't do that analysis. We just collected data from everybody. And we use the ICRP 135 methodology to calculate the median dose, but there is a limitation with that methodology. It gives equal weight to each facility, irrespective of size and volume. So you could be a facility doing 10 CTs, and SAMS could be a facility doing 1,000 CTs, but I give you both the same weight in calculating my DRLs, which in a way is a limitation, but it's equal across all facilities. So there were some of the limitations of this data. But what are the advantages of the data we publish? Well, first of all, it gives you something to compare to. And these are the 10 most commonly performed exams. And I bet you if you look at facilities in the United States, most facilities will fit in the 10, 60, 80% of their exams will be the top 10. And this was across a broad representation of geography and practice types, as I showed you. So I'm not saying this data only applies to academic or only applies to community. This was data based from everybody in the United States. First time nationally in the US that we have DRLs now for heads or for adults and peds, which are based both on patient size and age. And what does this help you? As you will learn more in the next talk, it helps facilities to compare their doses to national benchmarks. I mean, when I say my dose is 45 and the DIR is 49, I'm very confident that's robust data because it was using 1.3 million exams for adult and 1.5 for peds. So I'm very confident comparing mine to national benchmarks. And if I'm lower or higher, I can optimize my protocol so it's more appropriate. Again, the limitation here being I have no idea what the clinical image quality is at each of the facility. And what might be acceptable clinical image quality for you may not be acceptable for Sam. So that is a limitation. We are just looking at one part of the coin, not the other part, which is image quality, which will change in the future, hopefully, for the dose index registry. So in summary, I talked about diagnostic reference levels. What they are, reminded you again that they are investigation levels. They are not regulations. I also talked about median or ADs, 50th percentile. And you need to look at both of them and be somewhere between achievable dose and DRLs when you're optimizing your protocols. Of course, the larger the patient, your numbers are going to be much higher. So it's for an average size patient. And overall, overriding clinical objectives of doing DRLs is you want to get acceptable image quality or adequate diagnostic information consistent with medical imaging tasks. So that's the only reason we are doing this, is to make sure we are optimized. And that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes. Any questions here? Hey, quick questions from me. So you're talking about the achievable dose. Is it just like the number that the ACR have it? I didn't catch that part. The achievable dose. How do you get that number?
So that is the 50th percentile
okay.
of the dose. The DRL is 75th percentile, and so achievable dose was something that I think it was NCRP that came up with, saying, yeah, here is your limit, but you don't have to be at that limit. You could potentially get good image quality with dose that's at 50th percentile.
Okay.
So then the goal is, as a facility, you want your dose between the 50th and 75th percentile. But most facilities, if you're 50th percentile, a lot of them are achieving dose below that, and then half of them are achieving dose above that. So you want to aim to be near the achievable dose, but if you're higher, that's fine as long as you're below 75th percentile.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes.
So they're telling you don't work at that limit where
Uh-huh.
you have to investigate. Work in a limit that where you can get decent image quality and a lower dose,
Yeah.
which is the achievable
I
dose.
see. Okay. And you're talking about the CT head dose thing, and it's maybe a little bit difficult to compare because of each country has a different age group.
For the head, for
Mhm.
pediatric or for adult?
So I mean, in my opinion, I feel like even like a pediatric or adult, it's still easy because like a head is head,
Head is head.
and I mean even like a you very big person or fatty person,
Head is head.
it's still the same
Exactly.
size. So I think it's like this is one thing that we can compare, no matter
Absolutely.
what, like a Western or Eastern
Absolutely.
country.
Yeah, so now you could look at your numbers, which Sam has in his slide. I don't, but you could look at already your head protocol and see how it compares to the DRL and AD for the adult data, because that's all you're starting out with, right? Adult. And you could see whether you're between 49 and 56, or if you're a little higher. Again, doesn't make a big difference.
It's not big a
You know, and
difference.
again, 49 and 56, it's the same magnitude. To me, even if you're up at 60, 65, it's okay. It's not that statistically different, 56 versus 65. I mean, if 56 versus 85, I think that's a big difference. But you can start by just comparing to the DIR data to see how you guys are doing here.
And also like compare our data with the ACR. Yeah, and other
Absolutely.
countries starting with the head CT.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. Any questions from here? Any comments? Okay, so one question from the online audience: to collect the data over 5 years, how do you factor in the change in equipment for the protocol parameter changing over 5 years?
Exactly. That's why this paper, the adult paper, was published in 2017 based on 2016 data. When I talk about the future of the registries, they are now looking at looking at DRLs for adult because exactly of the question that was asked, because technology changes over time. And so you want to do the same exercise over again, because now if there are more modern scanners, hopefully those numbers are going to go down even more. So yes, you have to do this exercise every 3 to 5 years to account for equipment change, practice change, population change. Who knows, population's getting healthier, then great, or they're getting more obese. The numbers are going to change. So this is not a one-time deal. You have to do it every 3 to 5 years. And ACR is going to start looking at adult again now, because it's been 5 years since we published the adult paper. Good question.
So next, we're going to go to the next talk about the application of the DRL in clinical setting by Dr. Samuel Bradley.
All right, so Dr. Cannell laid the foundation for the next couple of talks I'll give today. Let's see. And so what's going to happen in this talk is we're going to apply everything that Dr. Cannell just introduced, but we're now going to talk very specifically about Thai data. So Nepapong gave me a representative report from your National Data Dose Registry, and we're now going to kind of look at that to give specific examples and ask some questions and have kind of a little bit of a dialogue, maybe a little bit of back and forth, to see what we can learn from this experience. So Thailand's got national DRLs. That's great. You guys have come a very long way. DRL values are now published, which was one of the goals that we had a couple years ago in the IAE mission. And it includes more hospitals than that which we were originally looking at here in Bangkok. So it's across the nation. So, of course, historically, you're all familiar with this, but these are some values that were originally put together from 2018, and then with the latest and most current DRLs from the data that was acquired from 2018 to 2020. And then, of course, you have, at least initially, you had these protocols listed right here. So now, going forward, Thai data includes the 14, as we have explained, the 10 common, and then the last 4, of course, are very specific to Thailand. And so I placed the original Thai DRL data here, which was just a few. It came from this table. And then this is the newest table that was listed. So this came from the OAP from 2018-2020 data. And then in the report that Nepal provided for me, they compared the 9 hospital values from the values, excuse me, the dose values from the 9 hospitals participating currently in the Thai DIR. So a couple of questions that I wanted to kind of to start this process. So looking at this as a snapshot, first thing we see here is looking at the 75th percentile. So the DRL is the 75th percentile, and then looking at the 75th percentile of the data. So these aren't DRLs on the right-hand side, but this is actually the 75th percentile of the data from the 9 hospitals. And you can see that some of the data is actually a little bit higher than the national DRL. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. The rest of the data tends to be lower. So a couple of questions I have is, what is the plan for within the Thai government to go forward? Do you guys intend to include, for example, pediatrics and SSDE?
Hey, you want to be at 50 kilograms?
Well, actually, within this 9 hospital, we have 1 children hospital, right?
Oh,
So we
great.
have the pediatric data, and we have the data for the age below 18. So we go to the pediatrics. Sorry, I didn't give it to you
No,
because
that's
the
fine.
data is very small. So yes, we have. But SSDE, I think most of the CT scanner, since they have the matrix anyway, they will send us the data.
Yep.
So I think we will consider to have it. Even the data come from GE Dose Watch, they also have SSD. So
Okay, that's wonderful. And then just a point of clarification, when you compare your data across, so from country to country, for example, you list, for example, upper abdomen and then whole abdomen. When you say upper abdomen, is that dome of liver to iliac crest? Okay, so it's true abdomen. And then the whole would be abdomen pelvis. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, so yeah, that's why I wanted to clarify that. So the way you guys define that, that's fine. But if you were to now publish this internationally, you would need to make sure there's clarifiers, just because obviously you do not list pelvis. So that's great. So as I mentioned, so looking at your data, we give this quick snapshot. You can see that for the head and the neck, when you compare the 75th percentile of these 9 hospitals, they are actually higher than the national DRL. And so there's, I want to talk about that in a little bit, but the reality is the majority of it is actually lower. And so what do we do with this data when we see that? So let me show you this right here is all the data from those 9 hospitals. So now we see the mean, the max, the min, the mean, sorry, the min, the max, the mean. Say that 3 times fast. Min, max, mean. Standard deviation, the 50th percentile, which is the median, the P75, so the 75th percentile, that's the DRL. That would be, this is, excuse me, it's not the DRL. This is what something could be used eventually when you calculate new DRLs. This is where that data would come from. And then you got the 90th percentile over here. So this data that Nepal provided for me was actually 2 quarters worth of data, January to June of 2022. So it's very recent. And a few things I wanted to point out in here were that you actually, if you look at the total exam numbers, wonderful population numbers. So when you're looking at brain, no contrast, you guys have, just shy of 18,000 for comparison. So those are really robust numbers. But in a couple of other examples, for example, upper abdomen, we only have a total of 13. And so remember, obviously the IAEA recommends kind of a minimum threshold. At the beginning, I know this is at the beginning of Thai, so a value of 2,000 is probably unrealistic. But we have to also be careful when you're looking at the mean of 13, that mean will probably be skewed pretty extremely. So you have to watch when you look at the data. So let's go through an exercise here. Let's look at the 50th percentile of these 9 oh, there we go. It went roll, sorry. Of these 9 hospitals, and we're going to compare that now to the Thai national DRLs. So remember, we always compare median to the DRL. And when you do that, everything is lower than national DRL. So that's just wonderful to see that. Everything is in line with meeting that threshold. So the question then is, so this is great success. So then the question would be, where do we go from here? And so we're going to address that in a second. But what now? That's just kind of the total data. A couple of things I wanted to point out here was, in this case, a couple of more small numbers here where chest contrast and whole abdomen contrast. Of these 9 hospitals, they were only submitting, this is 1 of 9. So this is just a single hospital of those 9, and this was their dose report. And in several cases, they didn't submit any exams because they probably didn't perform those exams at their hospital. But they did submit just a couple of small numbers. In this instance, it's statistically speaking, it's very difficult to get real good values. And so to calculate DRLs, you'll need to create a threshold. IAEA says somewhere between 2,000 to 5,000. But then to do a comparison with the national DRL, the Thai government's going to want to come up with kind of a low threshold also. If someone submits only 1, 2, or 3 studies, that tends to be a little bit more difficult. These may not be very common studies at this particular hospital, and that's okay to not include them in the dose registry. So that's just a comment there. And then I wanted to circle back over to one of those hospitals, and sorry, the font is real crazy. That's crazy. Sorry. It's like a magic eye. Yep. Ta-da! That's why I brought Kalpana with me. So anyway, I wanted to circle back around to looking at this one hospital, and now we're comparing its median values to the national DRLs. And Kalpana brought up several points, and I want to kind of talk about how one hospital can skew a national DRL. So if you look at this, the values are a little bit high, 62.4 compared to 52.9. And then when you do a 2-phase brain with and without, it's 91.5 versus the 57 with no contrast and 57.2 with contrast. So when you look at, I guess if you total these two, it would be lower than that. It would be nice if this was split out. That hospital probably just didn't submit that. But when you look at these two, when you look at the total number of these exams, I added a column here where I look at the percentage. So this is the total number of exams from this hospital compared to the total number submitted of all 9 hospitals. And you can see that this brain no contrast represents 38% of the data that was submitted. And you can come down here and neck, for example, that's 44% of the data. And everything else, right here is what I wanted to show. The chest, no contrast, represents 78% of the data. So when you have data that is a large percentage, this is one of the weaknesses. Kalpana pointed this out, especially in the ACR. So in the US, we have this exact same problem. Every data point is equally weighted. And that can be problematic because if in the next couple of years, if this hospital continues to submit this volume of exams, when you go to calculate your new DRLs, your DRLs are probably going to be skewed higher because of this one hospital. So there's 2 ways to approach this, obviously. The first one is you need to either do some kind of statistical weighting so that each hospital is, instead of being equally weighted, a hospital that has a particularly high volume may be weighted slightly differently, or as probably the best option is we need to go talk to this hospital. And I know Nepapong mentioned to me there's already plans to go back and see what can be done to maybe lower these doses. All right, so that was CTDI volume. So when you look at, of course, DLP, so Nepapong provided me also DLP data. And I wanted to just point out why why go through the process of getting CTDI and DLP? So when we look at CTDI values, Kalpana mentioned that oftentimes physicists, technologists, they think CTDI. And that is a very useful value because it helps us understand what's going on with the MA, the KV, the rotation time, just the radiation output. And we can fix a protocol if we understand these technique factors. Well, the beautiful thing about DLP is it takes into account all of those things I listed, the technique factors that produce radiation, but it also takes into account how we use the scanner. So if we are consistently landmarking appropriately for a chest, then the DLPs will be consistent over time. If you are not consistent among tech usage, or if some hospitals where the physicians come back and say, please add more, and I've had one hospital, I went in and they were complaining to me about their image quality for their chest. I'm like, okay, well, I'll come in and I'll look at it. And the chest started at the sinuses and ended at the pelvic floor. And it was their chest. And I explained to them, there's a reason why you can't see a lot of things, because the dose is inappropriately is set for the face, the neck, abdomen, the pelvis. So even though you call it a chest, this is not a chest, it's a combo. So we set it up, got it all properly put together. And my point here is DLP is a great, we should be looking at both the CTDI volume and the DLP because it gives us an opportunity to look at the usage of the machine. So once again, we have the opportunity to look at the P50 or the median values, and we can compare that to national DRLs. So here are the values for those for the one hospital, and here's is that hospital's median values compared to the DRLs. And if we just kind of put my little arrows here, once again, you can see that the DRLs, the median values are higher than the DRLs for DLP. So not only is the CTDI high, but so is the DLP. So this could be one of two things. Well, this is going to be one of two things we have to look at. CTDI is high, that means output is high. But if the DLP is also high, it's also potentially just output, or it's output plus length. And so they may be imaging beyond just the traditional brain, the SOM line. Okay. The next thing I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about is being able to put in patient demographics. So we have the average is going to be about 60 kilograms. Is there an initiative from the Thai group to start adding in the patient size? Not SSDE, but like putting in that, for example, the average head and brain without contrast in the US is 14 to 16 centimeters. That's the average that was used for the yeah, I'm asking the question, yeah.
On the data collection that we have, should I
assume you guys have this data when you've gone through and you've collected like head. Did you make measurements when you set up your DRLs for head right here? Do you know what the average patient thickness was?
No,
No.
we don't measure it.
Okay.
Yeah, but we can collect the data.
Okay, and that's great. So going forward, that's one of those next big steps is when you have it, because obviously for body, you mentioned 60 kilos. For head, it's going to be probably a physical size or an age.
is that the data that we normally have on the scanner, on like the something?
Well, there's two things. The DRL from data collection, we just define the weight of the patient, 60
the weight,
plus. That's all. We
Okay.
didn't do any measurements of the image because the people who went out to do data collection, it's just the physicists from the ministry when they. No, this is not the Thai DRL.
This right here is from this is from ACR.
Yeah, it's
This
from
is
ACR.
I'm just showing an example of how we in the US show CTDI, SSDLP as AD and DRL.
No.
And then we define for that specific category. So example, head, brain without contrast. That average patient thickness was 14 to 16 centimeters.
How did you define patient size without doing the measurement from the scan?
With the dose report, also a localizer scan is sent to the DIR.
Okay, so you
they
have to
can
have
do
a
a
software to do it.
Yes, so they have software
Cannot
that
do
can,
manually.
yeah.
As I asked from the radiometrics, they can do the diameter.
Yep.
But not sure about the brain, whether they have to check whether they can have for the lateral diameter or not. But for the body, they also have.
So I think I don't have radiometrics, and I don't know if it can do some measurement for the head, and it
Yeah.
would be able to, and you can collect that information, right, for each patient's head?
It's
Yeah.
part of, Radiometrics can do that.
As long as they calculate SSD, they can do it.
Yep.
No, but I think for the brain, I don't think we need it, right? Because brain is brain, head is head. Similar to like a Asian and Western and things.
The head is head for adults, but for peds below 6 years of age, there is a difference in head size. Yeah, it depends on the facility, whether you do age or size.
And once again, for the ACR, we use size, and but for the Tiger, they just need to come up with what. So they use weight for body, and then
that's
for
fine.
maybe head, they can do age. I personally believe, coming from a pediatric site, size is the best, because they're, even for a 5-year-old kid, you can't have a big head kid and a small head kid.
Yeah.
Hydrocephalus, that's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, you
Okay.
can do that.
So this thing must be from the DRR project. That hospital that sent the data would have the dose management system. But for the country DRL where we do like go out to do measurement, this is not possible.
Okay. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So one way of doing it might be, depending on how many patients they do in a day, which I don't know how much is, you don't want to introduce this, but one way would do it is just look at the scout and do a measurement, and somehow that is sent to the DIR for places that don't have radiometrics.
So most vendors, and I'll have to maybe see if I can collect some data, and I'll show you this in a different day. But when you look at the DICOM information on the Scout, they actually already make all the measurements for you, and it's listed in the field. So you just have to know what the DICOM value is, and it's all there. Yep. And so then you just have to write a really quick script, and it pulls that out.
Maybe I'm not sure if we can set up a DRL from our DRR project in the near future, because the number of sites that feed the data. But for our national survey program, I will discuss with the ministry if we can incorporate with this, because if the hospital send the data from 20 patients, it's not that big deal for the technologists to do the measurement and submit the data, because they submit the data anyway.
Yep. And then as you collect more and more over the years, that will actually be very helpful, because it gives a way for you to compare. So you can see here for the adults in the ACR, for these, the average, in this case, size was 29 to 33 centimeters. So it's not that there's you can have multiple categories. In this case, for the adults, we have a single category for the national DRL. And of course, Kalpana's paper, she showed you all the different options within that. All right, thank you. That was a great conversation. All right, so what does that mean, comparing that nationally? And so Kalpana actually showed how we in the U.S. compared our data internationally. Excuse me. And I think that's always a very important thing. So you can have local hospital data that might be lower than national data, and you can have national data, but then how does that compare internationally? So yeah, everyone will maybe here in the hospital, the 9 hospitals, for example, here in Thailand, median values are all lower than the Thai DRL. That's a wonderful thing. But what if you're maybe a standard deviation higher than all the regional nations? And so that's always a very helpful to kind of do a 2-step comparison, locally and then internationally. And so some data that was provided, once again, by Nepapong, shows that here's your Thai DRLs. And so we have 52.9 for the CTDI, and Kalpana already mentioned that for us in the US it's 56. So you're doing better. You guys are you're beating us. And then you're actually doing better when you compare, for example, to like Korea and Japan. which probably population-wise may be a little bit more comparable than, say, the US or maybe Australia. Sorry, the font's low. I'll fix that before you get a PDF of it. And just generally speaking, everything is kind of doing well. And so this is just, I'm not going to go through every category for comparison, but for you, this is a way for you to go back and say, okay, are we in line with what's being done locally, as in within the country, and then internationally?
E for Thailand, Korea, and Japan is much higher than the US. So there's something that the Asian countries are doing different in the head. The length is DLP is much higher. So that, and you can see the trend between those three countries, even Japan being the highest. But that's interesting. Yeah. So that means our scan is much shorter than in Asia, looks like, from that DLP value. So that was interesting to point out.
I mean, we obviously, typically, we try to tilt and get the eye lens out of it. But I noticed more and more publications where people are not as concerned, and so they scan through the eyes. And that's actually becomes a part of the diagnosis. So
I think one thing like for the head scan right now with the new scanner, we are not able to tilt the gantry at all. We just need to scan the whole thing.
It has to be a mechanical tilt.
Yes, tilt the patient. Like trauma patient when you tilt
Trauma
them.
patient, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
There is one thing that we commonly found here that like sometimes when they scan like at the head,
Mhm.
it's not just like at the vertex. It's maybe above
Into
the
the
vertex.
air, yeah.
Yes. Scan the air.
We know radiologists like looking at blacks.
Something like
Images.
that for sure. Yes.
So but thank you, Kalpana. That's a great thing. And so that's actually just kind of the benefit of this, is you have the opportunity to ask this question: why is my DLP longer or larger than others? And then you can kind of go back and you can start to do that analysis. And so that's really what a DRL is meant to do. It's an investigative tool. All right, so just a couple more things to just kind of talk about. What are the next steps? So recommendations from for me is, as we've already kind of talked about this, is to include SSDE, to include some kind of patient demographic descriptor, so that you can kind of know how things are relating. And so that's also helpful, because if you have, for example, a head with a neck, which say it's 18 to 22, and then you're comparing that to Japan or to the US or Australia, you have a way to say, okay, their heads are the same, or their necks or their bodies are the same. And you may find that they're not. And then then when you see your CTDI value is different than theirs, you can understand why that is. And then, of course, the encouragement is to now include achievable doses in the next report. So you probably already have achievable doses, yeah, and you just didn't show them to me, so that's great to have. All right, so you guys have already discussed this, and so it's kind of belaboring the point, but you guys, a new grant coming on, bringing on more people, bringing up your study values, population numbers to 2 million, and to try to on-site 8 new. Those are all great. Those are like the most appropriate next steps, next goals to have, because when you start getting up into that 2 million study point, that's when statistics really will come together. And having 8 more sites coming in, hopefully they can be, once again, a variety across the region, across Thailand itself, and both a sampling of maybe community versus academic. And then formalizing that quarterly report. Talked a little bit about that in my last talk, but having a very consistent and organized report will help hospitals to gain the most out of being a member of the National Dose Registry. And then, of course, training on how to use them at the local level, just kind of like we had this conversation. All right, and then, sorry, it keeps going. Reassessment every 3 to 5 years, but Kalpana talked about that, so I won't even belabor that point. So I think, yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to ask you questions this time
Yes,
instead of you asking me questions. Turn the table on you.
Oh yeah, we sure will take all your comments into consideration, because the data is already there.
That's great.
But since the first report that we sent out just only the first quarter, and then we get the data to the third quarter already. So it's just a matter of pulling out the data. At the moment, since we only have 9 hospitals, the way we do is reverse from you. For ACR, hospital send the data. For us, we pull the data from the hospital. So if the hospital the number is like this, we can do at the moment. So this is just like the practical phase for us.
That's good.
For the achievable dose, when we do training for the application of DRL, we do training. So the technologists across the country now, they kind of get the idea what is a DRL, what can they do with it, how can they use in the right way. Like we got into the big problem, like many of the technologists, they like to interpret DRL in different way. Like they want to do compare one single data from one patient and compare to the DRL, which is wrong. So we just need to educate them. Like you need to use your hospital median value to compare, because DRL is mean for standard size population, and I think things were getting better and better if they collaborate. So I think we come in the right way.
Yeah.
And also with your guidance, we will do better.
Webinars on the ACR website. So
Yeah.
if that's open to the public, you can use those as well. I think you really need to set up a website where everyone can go to for information, which is what Sam also suggested yesterday or earlier today. But having a website is incredibly important for this process where everyone can go look at information on that website. For like the DIR, you need one for the Thailand.
We can use Nepapong's Facebook account.
That's for sure. Like for the Asian
all
representative.
And then we can find out about where to go eat too.
Well, actually, we have the platform from the Royal College. They have the online platform that we can use, but maybe in the future we will look into it and then set up the grant, maybe collaborate with the vendors or something that we can set up the free access, so that their customers or our customer who participate in this project can log on and have the online training. And now, since most of the technologists in the country, they need the continuing education points, we can set up that. We actually, the Thai Society of Radiological Technologists, we run the webinar series that we have these topic all the time. And our webinar, the limitation is at 500 seats. We get all 500 people log on all the time.
Oh, wow. That's
And
great.
that's the good news.
That's great.
So, P.O. Napapong, can you clarify for me? I maybe missed a couple information. So for the Thai DRL, that data come from the 9 hospital site, or like from all over the country?
No, at the moment, since our DRL only have 9 sites, we can't use that to set up the DRL. The data is too small.
Okay.
So the DRL, the national DRL, come from the data that we have been collected over the time. And it has been done twice, but one by the Ministry of Health and one by Dr. Panrutai Group. And the ministry will run every 5 years as we recommended to them. So the city circle, I think they will restart soon. But the first modality that they do second phase is the digital radiography, the plain radiography. That's why this cycle they will do the DAP instead of the entrance surface area. And CT for the next phase, I think we can, well, they asked us anyway, so we will kind of, with the information from YouTube, maybe, not maybe, we sure will incorporate the size of the patient, because normally when they go to collect the data, the technology, they have the form, because all 100 CT scanners in this country, the physicists from the ministry, they go to check anyway. So when they go to check the machine, they have with them a form, so that the technologists in each hospital, they will get the data, whatever they want, like the dose from the KV technique, whatever, from brain scan or for whatever scan. So we just add additional information that we need, then we will get it. So The good thing is we have 1,000 scanner. It's not that a few, but it's a lot, but it's not way too many. But we luckily that we can manage so that every single CT scanner in this country we test it, so we get information.
That'd be great.
So which means you said like the Thai DRL that we have right now is a combined two informations together from the government or not? It's separate.
No.
So it's just like the data that Dr. Panritai
We have
collected.
two DRLs.
Okay, two DRL.
In the US, I think you have both ACR-DIR and the AAPM, right? Yeah, from different survey, and probably the different machines.
Yes.
So
over the
the
years, yeah.
data they doesn't are not the same. The
Yeah.
data are different.
Yeah, I think kind of like as I'm showing here, the data that I compared and that Nepapong provided for me came from what Panrutai provided.
So TH 6043,
Yeah.
and that's from like the manual things that Dr. Panritai did
Yeah.
before. It's not from like the nice side.
The nine sites we can't set up DRL from
Not
the nine
yet,
sites
right?
at the moment. Once we have 300 sites, then it's possible. So we have to work hard so that the installation of the software will be there and the data submission will be there.
Yeah, and that goes because you can see here. Here's the 9 hospitals. They're not part of this DRL, but that's the comparison of why we talked about how this one hospital right here, if that one was contributing to the DRLs of the next cycle, it would actually pull your DRL higher instead of lower. And so that's why, as Nepapong mentioned, we need to you guys need several hundred sites.
No, but you said something like for the hospital that is a good collaborator that sent a lot of cases for the DRL, right? It's like a 38% submission and
No, they
70
did not send the DRL, they sent the dose data.
This is
Oh,
just
the
their
dose
data.
data.
Yeah, this is their dose data. And so the fact that they contribute 78% of the current 9, so of the chest studies, 78% comes from this hospital alone. And so that it's a highly skewed value. And so that's why if you have several hundred sites, now that 78% will go much lower and it'll be more even across all hospitals.
I think when Dr. Chirapon come on Thursday, we can discuss with her so that somehow we can go up to the management of the country or something. And with the Ministry of Public Health, Dr. Panrita already talked to the Ministry of Public Health so that we will find a way. Since I mentioned that 70% of the CT scanner belong to the private-public collaboration, so if somehow we can manage to put a clause that they will have to collaborate in this project, then we will have more than 300 centers.
That would be great.
Then that's the way to go.
Yeah.
So the data will be more solid, like because like manual data collection, only 20 samples from each exam.
Yep.
There are two questions from the online. So the first one is the median patient size measured over the wideness diameter by the DMS?
Every system will kind of do it differently, but it's typically going to be the average. So for a chest, it's going to make the measurement at all the slices, and it'll be the average.
Average.
And that's just the way most monitoring systems do it. It's an average.
Yeah. The second question is, what is the significance of the standard deviation in dose analysis?
Yes. Well, so let me come back. There we go. Nope. There we go. So we got the minimum and the maximum values. We understand that. And then the mean. And that mean will skew depending on the minimum maximum. So if you have a couple of outliers that pushes your maximum really high, there's the potential that your mean will go high. That standard deviation is going to tell you the variance or the spread of your data. And so if you have let me see here. We have, let's see. So here's a 900. Oh, that's because there we go. So here we can see there's just a couple of different standard deviations. So in the neck, the brain, no, that's not a good example. Let's find, here's one as a chest. The standard deviation is 197. That means when you look at the mean, 321, or the median of 265, if you go plus or minus 197, that's the spread. That's one standard deviation. 2 standard deviations, 3 standard deviations. So 1 standard deviation is 67.5% of the data. 2 standard deviations is 97% of the data. 3 standard deviations is 99.5% of the data. And so you can see the more standard deviations you go, the more that number is going to include all of the data. So if you have your first standard deviation is very wide, that means your data is has a lot of variance in it, a lot of spread. And so you ideally would like lower standard deviations, but you really can't control that. What this is doing by showing it, it's actually just it's helping you understand what that variance is. It's more for the statisticians, it's more for the people in the OAP office. It must be almost lunchtime. I can't talk anymore. So yeah, that's a great question. But for your comparison at your center, you don't really use standard deviation. It's the median compared to the DRL, which is the 75th percentile.
Any more? Napapong giving me a hard time again. He want to eat. I don't think we have more questions from the online people. Anything else from here? Okay, yes. It is a very long question.
I
But
think what she asked was that in terms of clinical practice for brain scan in local practice, some of the hospital they use the fixed technique and
Okay.
only few use the AEC. So what's your opinion?
You know what? It can go both ways. I think so. In my hospital, we use fixed technique. Yeah.
for the brain, for the children.
When you do AEC, it will change. Obviously, the head slants and there is difference in diameter. And so you can get a little bit of dose optimization. But for kids where we have multiple different protocols, we found it was just easier to pick the right dose, the right MA, the right KV, and we have it fixed. So over the range of the scan, it's 1 MA.
About adult brain.
Personally, for us, ours are fixed. Do you guys?
Scanner.
Yeah, so it's really
So for
some-
GE, we have fixed.
Yeah.
For Siemens, we have automatic tube
Tube
current
flow, yeah.
modulation. It depends on the image quality and what the doctors like. So the neuroradiologists on the Siemens scanners, they don't like the quality on the GE scanner, so we kept it fixed, a little higher dose. While on the Siemens, they're okay with image quality, so we can modulate a little bit and reduce the dose. But even more important question for head is whether you should use an axial scan or a helical scan. That I think is more of a relevant question because helical scan can introduce artifacts. So some people use helical, some use axial. I don't know what you use.
We
but-
do all helical. We have the 320 centimeter slice scanners. So most of our patients can do a single rotation. Some vendors have artifacting coming off of the vertex of the head because of the thickness of the skull, you get banding. So we actually do helical, and for us, it's been fine. But helical does cause, I can bring some images of this maybe later in the week, where most kids don't put their head where they're supposed to. Their head will be off center. And so our radiologists want all of our heads reoriented. And if you have a helical artifact in there and you reorient the pixels, you get swirling artifacts. We call it the Cinnabon effect. And so there are some issues when you do helical. But if you still have the old 4 centimeter or maybe even a 64 centimeter, and when you're doing step and shoot through the brain, that can also cause a lot of artifacting. So it really goes back and forth as to what you use. It depends on your technology, and it depends on even the dose output and your patient population. Yeah.
I'm
It-
so
it-
sorry. I am a high maintenance person. Yeah, very picky on things. But I mean, for us at IU, we also do like the fixed technique,
Yeah.
and also the fixed dose, and also the helical technique for children and adults.
Yeah.
Because right now we like to have the reformats, axial, and coronal.
Yep.
That is really useful for us to detect like the small subdural or subarachnoid.
Yep.
Yeah. Mhm. Okay.
That's a
so
great question. I like those questions.
Okay, so Napapong said we need to eat now, lunchtime, and for the online audience, we will come back